Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada and with the support of Omnovos, Canada's digital customer engagement company. Omnovos makes personalization easy by helping you engage the right customer at the right content at the right time. Find out how you can get started quickly and affordably so you can focus on doing what matters most, driving revenue and margin growth at www.realcustomerengagement.com. The Voice of Retail is also brought to you by Range. Range helps brick and mortar brands turn store visitors into digital customers. Learn how Range added 1 million new subscribers to retailers' CRM in just 6 months by texting DATA to 55055 and unlock the strategy to massive database growth. In this episode, I'm in Ottawa talking with Levi Tools President and CEO Robin Lee and Jason Tassé, Chief Operating Officer, about the rich heritage of this Canadian retailer, their unique retail format, and adapting to the COVID-19 crisis with innovations such as the new Contactless Shopping Capability for their stores across Canada. Next, veteran urban planner and author Joe Barrett talks about what makes our cities great, the current and potential impacts on cities with the massive changes happening today brought on by the COVID-19 crisis, and all about his recent book, Perfect City. But first, let's hear from Robin and Jason from Lee Valley Tools. Robin and Jason, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you both doing today?
Wonderful. Thanks for having us.
Doing very well. Thank you very much.
Well, it's such a treat for me to speak with you both. As you know, I'll declare myself now. I'm a big fan of Lee Valley Tools, and I'm from Ottawa, and I'm a big fan of both of yours and the work you do. So it's a real treat for me to spend a bit of time here on the podcast. So why don't we jump in for those who may not know of you as well? Why don't we start by telling listeners a little bit about your personal professional journey and your role at Lee Valley Tools. Robin, why don't we start with you?
Well, I didn't have very much choice of a career. This is our family business. I started working for Lee Valley when I was 16 years old. Literally have done virtually every job in the place. I built our first showroom when I was in my grade 13 year of high school. And a friend of mine and I actually constructed the tiny showroom that we first opened up to the public. I've picked, packed, received. I do product design. I've written software. It's just been an incredibly challenging and varied 42 years.
And write copy too. So I think I want to get into that a little bit later because you have a particular flair for that as well. Jason, what about yourself? I don't think you're born into the business, but I associate you with the business. So tell me about yourself.
Unlike Robin, I had a choice, and though not part of the family, I do feel adopted. I started 25 years ago. I was working on my university degree in a very tough job market, and I was stacking wood in a lumber yard here in Ottawa, and winter was coming, and the cold weather, and I was looking for a job, and somebody had told me about this local business where if you pick and pack really, really well during the Christmas rush, you might be one of the few that get extended into a full-time job. So that was the beginning of my journey at Lee Valley, and I made it my mission to be one of the one or two selected to stay on. And 25 years later, I've been really well supported, and much like Robin, I've been able to work through multiple roles within the company. Mm-hmm. But that's my journey.
And today, what do you do? You're COO of. Give me a sense of what you do, not just your title, but what your scope of, and what you focus on.
Well, my job is to support Robin and the family as we kind of navigate the business through its growth and its various stages of plateau. My focus is primarily on operations, execution, and strategy co-development with Robin. Mm-hmm. But as the Chief Operating Officer, it's really just to kind of burn in the strategy and deliver as we need. But at the same time, look for opportunities. One of my biggest roles in recent history is helping Robin with the succession turnover of our management team. At 43 years, a lot of our knowledge and brain trust, is going on to well-deserved retirement. Mm-hmm. And the biggest challenge is bringing in the right type of leaders. And that's been consuming quite a bit of our time lately, up until March.
I had the opportunity last week or the week before to interview the co-CEOs from Moose Knuckles, the apparel brand out of Montreal. And I've also had the chance to interview the folks at Farm Boy. Both have at one point or another had the kind of a co-leadership structure. Robin, how do you go about breaking the tie, so to speak? I guess at the end of the day, your name's on the building, so you win. But in a general sense, when you're looking at everything from strategic decisions to other, how do you? And there's I'm sure at some point there's different perspectives or different views. How do you? What's your process for going through and resolving that to completion? How does that walk me through how that leadership structure works in a kind of a day-to-day level?
I certainly think that we don't pay an awful lot of attention to titles. I think Jason and I are very complementary. At 1A and 1B, and most days I'm not sure who the 1A is. I think we play off each other very well, and we both have tremendous respect for each other's talents. We really check with each other and check with the rest of the senior management team too on a lot of things, but having worked together for so long, you can almost predict what the other person's approach is going to be, and it becomes very efficient to understand with whom you should be consulting and about what, and it's incredibly effective when you have it, and it's also very difficult to onboard people into that structure. Right. And then that's to Jason's credit, something he's been working very hard at and doing very well with. I jokingly say I'm a benevolent dictator within the business, and the great thing about the structure we have is I don't ever have to be the dictator. We do operate by consensus, and it's a little Orwellian that some pigs are more equal than others. Yeah. But the great thing is that you never have to use that weight, and we're just very fortunate to have a tremendous management staff.
I've been speaking to a lot of leaders over the time of the COVID era, and one of the things that I wouldn't say enjoyed, but they observed or they wanted to capture was a speed of decision making. In other words, there's decisions that were taking years to make, whatever that decision was, that were made in weeks, not months, not years. And many wanted to capture that kind of momentum. How would you describe your process for decision making? Is it organic as you're describing? Do you sleep on it for a couple of months, or look for more data? I guess it depends on the decision. But would you characterize, I guess, your decision making process more efficient now, or it has always been, as you described, kind of organic and pretty efficient?
Well, I'm gonna turn this over to Jason because he will know the quote better about the good times and hard decisions. Jason?
Yeah. One thing I would declare is that Lee Valley, throughout the culture, throughout the organization, from the family to our frontline staff, are brand protectionist. And pre-COVID, that extreme sense of pride and protectionism of the Lee Valley brand makes decision-making tough because people are really vested in the outcome and success of the business. So, you have a lot of, I would say, well-earned friction in the system, but from a good place. Now, post-COVID, the expression Robin was referring to is tough decisions in good times can be easier decisions in tough times. When your focus shifts to, survival and navigating a global crisis, all of a sudden the organizational focus comes down to 2 or 3 key priorities. And that protectionism, the perspective shifts. And now, the natural friction in the system is actually support to do the right thing. And there's a little bit of forgiveness for error in process or testing in field. But we certainly have accelerated a lot of our decision making, and the innovation in the past 8 months has been off the charts with respect to Lee Valley's history.
There is a little bit of a question of being on a burning platform too. You don't spend a lot of time figuring out which fire extinguisher is going to be the best one to use. You grab one, and if that one doesn't work, you grab another, and you do it quickly.
Well, I was speaking yesterday with my partner for another podcast I have, Remarkable Retail, Steve Dennis, and we were talking on that episode around how do businesses fall into disrepair with big businesses, big retailers who are filled with very smart people, and his observations are it's underestimation of the risk of doing nothing. In other words, the opportunity cost of, well, let's just, Jason, you got me thinking about that when you say there's a lot of brand protectionists. There's maybe an orientation in some organizations to say that everything's working fine, let's not change it, but that's clearly gone for the COVID era. So anyway, it's great to hear that discussion between you. Robin, I got ahead of myself a little bit because I wanted to follow that narrative a bit. Tell us about Lee Valley Tools itself. We've, the origin story. You've referred to its heritage in Ottawa. Or I have certainly, and number of stores, what you sell, that kind of thing. For those listening who may not know of Lee Valley Tools,
we started off actually around 1976 by making a barrel stove kit, and these were the cast iron parts that you would bolt onto a 45-gallon drum, and you had an instant wood stove, and a wood stove that was about 82% efficient, and for about $60 to $70. And what a wonderful way to learn mail ordering cast iron, which surprisingly breaks an awful lot when it's dropped. My father who started the business wanted to build his experience in something completely unrelated to what he actually wanted to do, which was woodworking tools. He had grown up on a homestead in Saskatchewan, and of course, they never had tools. So he always had an appreciation for really good quality hand woodworking tools. And at that time, there was really no firm in Canada doing what firms, about 10 firms or so in the U.S. were doing. And using that sort of rule of thumb, if there's 10 in the U.S., there should be one in Canada.
Right on.
Or room for one in Canada. So he decided to start a woodworking hand tool company, and it was his view that it could eventually grow to support 10 to 20 people. That was his wildly aspirational goal, and of course, somewhere along the way, it just got out of hand, and we ended up where we are. But I think that really what we've done over the past 42 years is follow our passion. If you set out to make money in business, you're going to have a really tough road. If you follow your passion, customers see that and it resonates with people. That's what we've done over the 42 years. We started out as woodworking, but I think what our business expresses is that ability to create for yourself and to work with your hands. That I call it the look what I made moment. Right. Most people my age can remember coming home from grade school saying, look what I made. And I've got distinct memories of things I've made, 6, 7, 8 years old. So that act of creation is very important to people. And whether it's cooking or sewing or home renovation or woodworking or gardening, that ability to extend a measure of influence and control over your physical environment is really core to what we're about. So a lot of woodworking tools, but we enjoy a number of hand engaging products, and we don't try to carry everything. We try to carry what we like, and we know what we like. So there's very much an editorial component to what we do as a company. We have to believe in what we sell.
Right on. I'm the recipient of in the cooking world, I'm not much of a gardener and not much of a DIYer, but from a cooking perspective, the great gadgets that, not even gadgets, the great solutions and things that have made my life easier. And they're, you're one of my first go-tos because I think I can't be the only person having this problem, getting the juice out of a lime or lemon or whatever in my latest kind of venture.
Yeah. And it's, that's our expertise really is in, discovering and relaying context and value for a customer.
Yeah.
In the area of the culinary world, we do not profess to be professional chefs, but we know tools. We know what really works well and what doesn't work well, and we can explain it to you so you can decide whether it fits into, what you do or your workflow.
Jason, tell me about, you go to market in an interesting way, in a couple of interesting ways, actually. You're still a catalog retailer. Not many of those left, but I'm surprised there's not more with all of us at home, and there's fewer things in the mailbox. And tell me a bit about the store experience, which is different, and how many stores you've got, and just give me a sense of how you go to market as Lee Valley Tools.
Today, we're 20 stores across Canada, coast to coast. Our store model is quite unique for those listeners who have never been into a Lee Valley store. The history that we often share with people is that our origins were a catalog company. Canada Post was, the primary carrier. Years ago, when there was a postal interruption, put the company at risk. And, we had to, move pretty quickly with respect to an alternative plan. And what we had done is we had turned one of our facilities into a showroom, an expression of the catalog, where everything is truly on display, one off with the product number written right below it. And much of the visual merchandising was set up like you would see on the catalog page. And, we modeled the in-store catalog slip, which you went and would write down the products on the wall, bring it to a counter. We'd pick it out of the same warehouse that we would fulfill our orders. The in-store design was, something created out of necessity. And then, decades later, we've just continued to roll out that model of a true showroom with a backroom warehouse. And the fascinating part about it is, as many retailers today are rationalizing their existing showroom space and moving to showroom models, what was a unique, different approach seems to have gone from what we jokingly say is clipboards and showroom, old school to cool now, with respect to everybody jumping on this rationalization of what a showroom should look like and how to express in the showroom. So today, we have true multi-channel. We've got stores, catalog, and digital, and we're doing everything we can to kind of blur those lines and blend it into one experience. During COVID, we actually created a feature on our website that you could access while you're on your phone in our showroom, and you could shop with your phone, scanning product, check on-hand inventory, fill your cart, and submit to the counter. So once again, trying to blur the lines so that the customer can shop any way they like, but leveraging our unique showroom experience.
Well, as you said, you're in some ways you developed the experience and 20, 25 years ago by necessity, but you wound up being way ahead of your time and even more ready for the COVID era. So let me follow that thread a little bit. So tell me about, you had the showroom experience. Now you've got an app so people can do contactless shopping in the showroom. Is that what you're talking about? That's interesting.
Well, what happened was for years we had been talking about when the technology was ready, leveraging our existing structure, and everybody has a phone. The reality was the clipboard and pencil system of writing down, just wasn't for everybody. Certainly our loyal customers love it, but younger shoppers would struggle with it a bit. And the question was, how can we leverage what we have and be appealing and attractive? So the technology just kind of wasn't there. But in October of last year, we launched our new website. And it made it very easy to have the development strength and the platform now to convert our website into an in-store shopping tool. Now, you use the term application or app. It's actually not an app that you need to download and kind of clutter your phone. What's really innovative about this one is there's just an icon. The website recognizes when you're on your phone, and it presents you a little scan icon. You just tap that, select your store, and now you're off to the races. You're literally just, navigating yourself through the showroom, scanning stuff, pulling up information, video. You could add it right to cart. You could save it for wish list. And then if you choose to check out, you could just submit it. We call out your name. You haven't touched anything. Your order's bagged and ready to go, and you can just leave the showroom.
Fantastic. Well, right for the times, right? I mean, the times caught up to your model, basically, whether it's the showroom approach or the or this harmonization, as you're describing, of the channels. It's really brilliant.
When it comes to change and people's acceptance, a crisis, creates a lot of challenges and roadblocks, but also opens up tremendous opportunity for difference. And no other point in our lifetime will you see a willingness to actually try on a full scale a different method of shopping. So the timing was right in that sense as well.
Well, yeah, for sure. I interviewed Roger Martin, kind of a strategist, and he said, not kind of, he's one of the top global strategists, and he was talking about how retailers and other businesses should consider consumer habits like a decaying asset on the balance sheet. What they used to do before is going to be very different, or has the potential to be very different, thanks to the jarring effects of the COVID era. Robin, one of the hallmarks for me is in Lee Valley Tools is the write-ups, and they're personal yet detailed, and they leave nothing to the imagination, but they feel like they're speaking to me. I mean, I was just reading the letter you sent out to customers, talking about a very realistic assessment of how the holiday is going to go. I thought that was a brilliant letter. Who are you writing that for? Tell me about who your customers are. You started with the heritage of the woodworker, the skilled woodworker, not just kind of the average do-it-yourselfer. But now, tell me about your customer. What do you know about them, and how do you think of them?
Well, the one thing that I know about most of our customers is that they know the truth when they hear it. So it's very important to me that we tell the truth in product write-ups. If we sell you too hard on something and it's not what you expected or not what you like, we're paying for that return. I mean, it's just inefficient business. And in a way, our business is a performance art. Sales are your applause. You have to know your audience. And you have to give your audience, not only what they want, but what they expect. And I think for most of our customers, we're dealing with people that this is, where they're engaged in a hobby. And, this is really important to them. And the potential is always there for a long-term relationship. So it's very important that we're accurate in what we say, and that we're accurate in setting expectation for the customer, not only about the product, but the utility and the value that they're going to get out of a product. The products we say, man, this thing is really expensive, but it's, it's the best thing.
Yeah, you can last a lifetime. Yeah, last a lifetime and do what it needs to do. Yeah, that's right.
And I think cutting through the clutter of so much marketing is maybe Uber marketing. Just that direct honesty. For fans of Tool Time on television, I like to say we're Wilson. The guy on the other side of the fence that dispenses that pragmatic, advice.
Advice and wisdom. Yeah, the unvarnished truth, so to speak. To a bit of a pun on.
Yeah, and you can never go wrong telling the truth. People will always come back, and it is a question of trust, but it's a question of relationship too. And even if you're sending them somewhere else, customers appreciate that, and they still come back to you.
We've talked about COVID, or we've mentioned it a couple of times in the conversation so far. But Robin, take me back to April. I mean, when the full force of whatever this was going to be was starting to dawn on leaders from coast to coast in all formats. How did you think about your priorities, and how did you start to think about what the business would do and become and react, and how did you start to think about it? What kind of products might be in demand, and other kind of products that you just can't move, or what were you thinking in April?
Well, the first thought is always safety. And there was just a tremendous thirst and questing for information. How do we manage this? What are the resources? What is the truth? What is the nature of what it is that we're trying to deal with? And it was a little bit in the early days, like, trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. Masks, no masks, touch is how we just didn't know what we were dealing with. We made a decision to have stand-up meetings every single morning. Saturday, Sunday, every day of the week with the senior staff, and discuss what we learned during the day. And those meetings, by the way, continue to this date. Not Saturday and Sunday. We've got them down to 3-4 days a week. But we still talk about what have we learned? What's going on in each market? How are the staff feeling? How are the customers feeling? What's working for us? What's not working for us? And so the sensitivity to change and difference was just incredibly heightened during that period. And then, of course, when the shutdowns happened, we were fortunate to be in to be a hardware store and one of the essential groups that could be open. but that didn't mean we could take risks with staff or customers. We're very fortunate that we have always had an order online, pick up in store functionality and so it was a very, very easy thing for us to go to a curbside pickup model.
Yeah, and it worked well. I mean, I did it a couple of times myself. It was great. Very smooth.
I do it to this day.
Yeah.
I still order from our own store as for curbside pickup. So I think we were very well positioned, and we were right sized, I think, to react to a lot of this. But the human cost of all of this is something we're going to feel for at least a generation.
I suspect for sure. I mean, everything from on the positive side, I was reading a report from my other partner, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois from Dalhousie, talked about 20% lift in gardeners this year, half of which he kind of assumes will go away because they'll realize it's really hard work. But just these different adoptions of different hobbies. I think it's going to, I think gardening for a lot of Canadians just adds a bit of control back in their lives, which sometimes maybe we feel we don't have.
Well, I think to a certain extent, it really reset the button on consumerism. And it certainly, hit the stop button on travel. People's worlds shrank tremendously. They became digital or virtual, and then all very, very localized. And I think that's put people back in touch from anything from making their own bread to growing their own vegetables, just out of a desire to do something different. I go back to that ability to create and have some control over your environment, which I feel is very important in something like a pandemic, is to be able to exert that level of control, even if it's only over a tomato plant.
It's always been there as an element of your brand, right? The ability to create. So now it just takes on a higher need, so to speak, as people, need to create and be good at it and discover maybe they like it, which we hope happens.
One of the comments I can just add on is even prior, to COVID was rapid adoption of digital in every aspect of our life, and this disconnect from the analog world. And, what had happened with COVID when people were now at home trying to, re-engage in community, find activity, is this reconnection in the analog part of their life, which is whether it's gardening, baking, interacting with people in a different way. And the nice thing for Lee Valley is we can help enable that reconnection, whether it's making bread, as Robin said, or the gardeners that you referred to. So we are very sensitive to that relationship of digital and analog in life.
Yeah, well, it's along an entire spectrum. My daughter is now a great mixologist thanks to the tools from Lee Valley Tools. So we enjoy cocktail hour a little better thanks to you. You can imagine all the large and small ways their lives have changed. Last couple of questions to you, Robin. 3 pieces of advice. You've been in this business. You've been a retailer. You're in manufacturing. You're a Canadian, great Canadian story. 3 pieces of advice for the retailers listening around. As they watch the industries around them transform, is there a playbook that you would say, here's the 3 things you should be focused on? And if there's a playbook, what would those first 3 chapters be entitled? What's your advice to retailers?
Well, I can't profess to be an expert, but I can certainly tell you what's important to us. The first one is honesty and transparency, with your staff, as well as with your customers. The best ways to get through a crisis is to be very open about what you're doing, and why. In the crisis. Really key for us, like some people running for president, is understanding your base. Know who your customers are and know what your differentiators are. We're not a transaction company. We're an experience company, and we're a knowledge-based company. Nobody can out Amazon. Right. Yet there are differentiators that reverse the question. How is Amazon going to compete with us? For our base, so draw in a little bit, focus on your core competencies in your base. And I think the other thing to do is to capitalize on every opportunity that comes your way. It is a great opportunity to make mistakes and to learn, and one of the things that we were very upfront in talking to staff was, what should we stop doing right now to focus on how we're going to change? There is a tendency in any business, to keep doing what you've done before. But just as important is to figure out what to stop doing, so that you can actually have that capacity to affect change. That's a great piece of advice. Everything you start, what could we stop doing, and what have we been doing that no longer adds value? It's one of those defining moments. Last question, Robin. For those who may be listening in government at any level, municipal, provincial, or federal, is there anything that you can say that would help you, a Canadian business, retailer, working through all kinds of different things? Is there any one or two things that they could be doing today different or new that you think would help retailers, yourself and retailers in general, get through this crisis? Well, I'll start off by saying our government has been a heck of a lot more responsive and supportive than many other governments in the world. Speaking as a business, all any business ever wants is a level playing field. We can compete with anybody else, but we have to have that level playing field. It's always good to use Amazon as the whipping boy, but I can still buy products from Amazon in Canada and not be charged tax. And if the government believes that people like paying tax, they've got another thing coming. Just having a level playing field, will let us compete on our own merits. Canadians can compete with the best of them. Absolutely. But what we can't do is compete with bad policy. Well said. Well, listen, it's been such a great pleasure for me to talk to you both. It's as I said up front, I'm a fan of the business to begin with, but such a great Canadian institution. I wish you continued success and safe holiday. And thank you again for both joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. Well, thank you very much for having us.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Joe, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing very well, and a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's really a treat for me to talk to you. I mean, I picked up your book, Perfect City, and with mentions of you being, I think, an urbanist, and Jane Jacobs. I think we have a lot of things in common. Well, what we don't have in common is you're an expert and I'm not. But I just kind of I like cities, and
we're all experts on cities.
I read through your book. I want to take another good look at it, but it was really interesting. And thanks for being on the podcast and give us an opportunity and listeners an opportunity to understand a big picture around cities, and then we'll kind of hone in on some more specific thoughts.
Sounds good.
Why don't we
good.
Yeah. Why don't we kick it off with a little bit about yourself, personal, professional journey, what you do at Urban Strategies, and about the work that firm does.
Sure. Well, I'm a partner at Urban Strategies, and I and my co-partner, founding partner, Frank Leuenberg, started the firm amazingly now about 40 years ago. And we started off just the two of us, and now it's nearly 100 people. What we have tried to do essentially is to combine a kind of planning regulation perspective on the city, zoning bylaws, official plans, and all that stuff, with a kind of strategic idea of what kinds of places cities should become. And so we sort of live in the space between the public sector and the private sector, which is essentially how development happens. Nobody can build a building just by themselves. They always have to get some kind of approval for it. They always have to talk to their neighbors. They always need some kind of servicing systems. This is not a book that's being written. It's a building that's being built. It's going to look like something. It's going to be in the urban landscape. So we've also spent a lot of time saying, what should this look like? So working with the architectural profession. So what I love about urban planning is it's kind of three-dimensional problem solving. It's not just accounting or legal or administrative. There's actually a thing at the end of it, which can either be an ugly thing or a beautiful thing. And one hopes it will be a beautiful thing, but also a functional thing. And city building is incredibly expensive. Buildings are incredibly expensive. So yes, it's an art form, but it's one of these art forms that operates right in the middle of the financial system, which is also fascinating.
And the work that you do, you're based in Toronto, but you do work in Canada. Do you do work outside of Canada? What's your kind of purview?
Yes, we're right across Canada, and I would say about half our business is there, and then the other half is in various places in the world and seems to move around, and I'm never quite sure why or where we end up, but done a huge amount of work in England and Scotland, in Asia, in Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, a lot of work in the United States, and then suddenly I find myself today doing a lot of work in Ireland, which is quite lovely. Urban planning is very local because it should be grounded in the city you're working in, and certainly the administrative and planning systems are intensely local, but the principles are global.
Well, let's talk about cities. And interesting, you mentioned Ireland, but I see Belfast in the book, and I've been to Dublin many times. I actually do some work for the Irish government. What a fantastic city, and the surrounding cities. Galway, just an amazing city in a different way. But let's talk about cities. What makes them great, and then what leads them into decline? I mean, in this book, The Perfect City, and for the listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes to pick it up. I highly encourage you to.
Buy the book. It's a wonderful read. I'm glad you called it a bedtime read too, because it's not too difficult, folks. It's an easy read, I hope.
Yeah, I'd call it very approachable. I mean, it's certainly not a technical planning guide, but it really gives you a high level of all the things I think we're gonna talk about. I mean, you call it a search for magic. I mean, what are the things in your mind that makes these cities great? You have each chapter you focus on a different city, New York and London and Toronto. And what is it in your mind that they share in common? What are those three things that great cities have? And then we'll talk about how they kind of lose that vibe over time, or could lose it.
I think it's this wonderful creative collision between extraordinary people and an extraordinary physical environment. What's fascinating is that there's kind of a different time lag. If we're lucky, we live in a city for 80 years, on this planet for 80 years, and we maybe in that period live in 2 or 3 cities. Cities have a much longer time horizon. So essentially, you're always living in the city that your father and grandfather and great-grandfather built, and mother, which has to be said. So there's that fantastic collision, and sometimes the city works well, and sometimes it doesn't work so well for the new economy. Great cities in the UK, like Liverpool, Liverpool was one of the great imperial cities of the 19th century. And then when it lost that economic engine, it fell into a rather sad decline, which is only now being reversed somewhat. On the other hand, you have a city like Shanghai, which always had a kind of historical presence to it, but suddenly in the last 20 or 30 years has exploded in population. So it's now a city somewhere between 25 and 30 million people. You have a city like London, which is, was a significant city in Roman times, and went up in Elizabethan times, and then slumped, and then went up in Shakespearean times, and then slumped, and then went up in colonial times, and then slumped, and had a huge burst of energy after being battered to death in the Second World War, and now I suspect is on a bit of a decline again. So it's just fascinating. And when you go into all these cities, and the question I was always asking myself is, what fuels a city's growth, and what engenders its decline? There are a whole bunch of different reasons, and it's not quite the same chemistry in every city.
So let's talk about the opposite end of that. You're described, at least by the publisher, as an urban fixer. You mentioned London. I remember, I don't know if you've read a great book called Ghost Map, which chronicles.
Oh yes.
The city of London was, in the late 1800s, just a teeming, not great city, like 8 million people, if you can imagine that, without sewers, and they had a cholera outbreak.
Yep.
And the book, it's a fantastic book about London and then the invention of what changed the world in some ways, sanitary systems. And I think about San Francisco as well. I spent a lot of time in San Francisco in the late 90s, the GoGo.com, and I worked for Levi's. And Then I talk to people who I still know, it's kind of like a hellscape sometimes, the way they describe it. How do cities, rise and fall? I mean, there's some macroeconomic things, but a city like San Francisco has nothing to do with economics. What is it that is it their very success sometimes that leads to their?
I think so. And San Francisco is a classic case to look at. Clearly in California, San Francisco for the longest time was the second city to Los Angeles. Los Angeles was the place of big growth, and then San Francisco lucked out on one particular industrial activity, hardly industrial activity, a tech activity, because tech activity really has no locational glue. It's not something that requires a port or requires special resources. It can actually almost go anywhere. It's completely footloose. So it goes to a beautiful place called San Francisco, where everybody loves to live, which had very good universities generating people who had all kinds of ideas that fit these economic opportunities. But in a funny way, it got loved to death. And that's why it's having some troubles right now. San Francisco, the city, is an impossibly expensive place to live for any normal human being. It is beginning to create a cost structure in which the folks who work in all these businesses can't afford to be. And then the alternative is out in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, which is very low density, has no transit system, really doesn't have enough housing range, etc. So it's one of these cities that probably, in a funny way, it wasn't big enough to cope with the boom that happened. And it's fascinating now to watch how that tech boom is spreading to New York, a more traditional city, but a city which has got the scale that seems to be able to accommodate it better.
Well, I'm glad you brought up New York. I mean, let's talk about the COVID era these past 8 months. I'm really intrigued to get your thoughts on this. I mean, it's funny. We've just been talking about history. You're describing London over the centuries. I mean, it's not the first macro shock. I mean, we can go back to the Second World War, the Spanish flu that has threatened the vibrancy of cities. New York City, one of my favorite cities beyond, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, just got hit so hard. Now, there's a lot of talk, but I don't think there's as much evidence of people saying, all right, I'm done with New York. I'm moving out. If I don't have to actually work here, I don't want to live here anymore. But, tell us about your thoughts around the lasting, if you have, lasting, it's early to say probably, but the impact you see on the way people work. Perhaps this could be the longest impact of COVID is more people will be working at home, therefore they move out. What do you think is going to happen to these major cities? I mean, we're in Toronto, and downtown Toronto is today nothing like what it was 9 months ago, right? Yep. So how are you thinking about, what lens are you looking at through today's events towards the future?
Well, the first is the long lens. Life is long. Cities' life is long. And you point out the fact that cities have shocks, Spanish flu. But let's not forget that 20 years ago, two jets crashed into the World Trade Center. An awful lot of people thought that was going to be the end of New York, of high-rise working and living. I think that the long-term impact of COVID is not going to be fatal to the kind of downtown dense office environment, but I do think it's going to have an impact. And it's going to have an impact because over the past really couple of decades, the square foot per employee in your typical big downtown office has gone from about 200, 250 square foot per employee down to under 100 as everybody's moved to open plan, as everybody's basically been packing people in because rents are so high, you've got to pack them in. I think that trend is going to get reversed, partly because I don't think rents are going to keep going up any longer. There is undoubtedly going to be some loss of office activity out to the suburbs. There's going to be some loss of people saying, no, I can do this job from home. But everything that I've seen suggests that the office occupancy of the immediate future, when people do get back to work, is going to be about 2/3 that of what it was pre-COVID. Because we're going to have extra spacing in the on the office floor, because there are going to have to be more offices and more cubicles rather than open plan. The whole idea of hot desking isn't going to work any longer. The second thing that's going to happen is that a proportion of your workforce is going to want to work at home for some portion of the week and some portion of the workforce perhaps permanently. So that means at any one time you won't have 100% of your staff complement in the office. It's going to be at home, or it's not going to be their days to go into the office. In our office, we're talking about a team A and team B scenario once we get back to work, which will mean that only half of our staff complement will be in the office at any one time. So that's going to have a big effect in a whole bunch of ways. But if you just reopen the New York Times today, there are stories on how Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and several of the other big tech companies are buying up space, leasing space in New York City like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah, huge amounts of space.
Huge
right?
amounts
Amazon
of space, millions of square feet. Same thing is happening in London, England. At the same time as everybody is, particularly in London, saying, oh, it's dead, it'll never recover. Well, there are quite a lot of smart people who are saying, forget it, that's going to happen. And this is because the truth is human beings have always loved going to cities, particularly young, smart, energetic, ambitious human beings have always said, I'm going to the city to make my life. It's the story of every novel. It's the story of every human era. And that ain't going to change. Maybe people will move out a little bit faster when they have kids. Maybe the Mississaugas and the Markhams and the Oakvilles and the Kitchener-Waterloos will be relatively more attractive. But is there still going to be a big office presence in downtown Toronto, the dominant office presence in the region in downtown Toronto? Yes. In Manhattan, yes. In the city of London, yes.
I mean, it's fascinating because the smart money, if you open up the paper and continue to page through, you see the smart money going in opposite directions, or at least talking about it. The ones who are putting the money down, Amazon, Facebook. I mean, Facebook just bought REI's headquarters in Portland. Amazon bought the old Lord & Taylor building from WeWork.
Right. Google just signed a very big lease in central London at King's Cross.
Hudson Yards, Amazon and Hudson Yards. I mean, and on it goes. Yet you've got your Shopify's, Twitter, and Square saying you work for home forever. Not that you can't change your mind about that. So, I mean, you had an article in the Globe and Mail, a great article last week that just talked about what you're saying, right? That to be young and ambitious means you live in a city, and maybe this all makes the cities a little more affordable, because that's the other contradiction, and you touched on it, right? Is this thing that makes the cities great, attracts people to live there, but then they become so unaffordable that the interesting people who make it great can't afford to live there. So it feels like this, that's the consistent paradox of great cities.
It is. No, it's like all things in life. Too much success kills the success. But what it really does is it spreads the success. So, I love Kitchener-Waterloo, but Kitchener-Waterloo would not exist if Toronto didn't exist. And so I hope that the life vibrancy you see in Kitchener-Waterloo is going to happen in Hamilton, in Barrie, in Peterborough, a whole bunch of other places around. I think it probably will. But you'll still need the furnace burning hot in the center.
Well, let's talk about, for the listeners who are in the retail sector or retailers themselves, how should retailers be thinking about their strategy in the major urban markets? I mean, if you looked at it today, if you took a snapshot in time today, you're like, let those leases expire. There's nobody there. The worst case scenario, I'm in an indoor mall attached to an office building, and I sell apparel. And that's kind of the trifecta of bad things to be doing right now from a sales perspective, at least in the very, very short term. But how, you have that benefit of both looking backwards and understanding the history, your sense of urban development. What would your advice to retailers be? Should they put up on their leases in downtown? You've got eCommerce that is just racing ahead in a great acceleration. It's up 63% this year alone. Kind of obviates the need for more stores. How are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to give advice in any specificity, because the other thing, as I said in the article, it's a bit too early to tell. I don't know if there are 5 acts in the play. We're, I think, in the middle of Act 3 right now.
Yeah, I was going to say
we haven't quite seen what's going to happen later on. We don't know whether a virus is going to be successful. We don't know how successful it's going to be. There's one scenario, that it's totally successful, and we can all put away our masks and get back to where we were. I suspect that
the
won't
vaccine,
be the case.
yeah.
There are some things which are definitely happening, and the best clue to what's happening is to figure out what was beginning to happen before COVID. The first, as you say, is e-commerce. There is that was growing, but quite slowly, actually. It's e-commerce market share before COVID. It has exploded. When you get old fogies like me, quite actively shopping that way, I know that the rest of the world is. So that is going to mean that the demand, the dollars behind physical retail space is just going to be that much smaller. So there's going to be less of it. There are going to be a few areas which I think are going to be really, really tricky. If we've only got 2/3 of the people working in the big office towers, then we only need 2/3 of the retail space underneath those office towers.
Right.
I went for a wander around through the path system just to have a look the other day.
Just to have a quiet thought amongst yourself, right?
Oh, it's terrifying. And I really feel for all of those retailers down there. Clearly there's going to have to be a massive retrenchment in that. I think then there's going to be the great winnowing out. What was happening before COVID was that smaller shopping centers were uncompetitive with the Yorkdales, the Square Ones, the other big successful shopping centers. So you're going to see, I think, disappearance, which is already beginning to happen, redevelopment of a lot of the smaller retail centers. We've been tracking this trend, or I've been tracking this trend around live, work, play, shop, which has this, Hudson Yards being the kind of, one of those examples of that, where there's shopping mixed with living, and you've got, in Winnipeg and in Scarborough, you've got condos opening up on or at shopping malls. That kind of consolidation of purpose. Do you think that's a sustainable trend? Yes, I think, to be honest, in a number of shopping malls, they're basically their retail function is going to fade away to a local service function. I think that's going to happen in quite a few, because there just isn't the destination demand for them any longer. But I think that the other trend, which I don't know what the implications are, but I sure as heck know there will be, is that all the big guys, Nordstrom's, Lord & Taylor, Macy's, the Bay, Indigo, are in big trouble. And these used to be the anchors of the major comprehensive retail centers. They also had a heck of a lot of square feet. And, we all remember down in the classic Eaton Center when Eaton's and then successive followers to Eaton's all faded away. And now Nordstrom's wonderfully took it over with a great store. You wonder whether that's a kind of cursed ground. Well, the other challenge for the shopping centers is that they turn to restaurants and bespoke food courts and fitness very to drive traffic. But, there's a limit again to how much that space that can actually take up. I suspect that we're going to see some of those larger units turned into office space. Or even potentially into converted into housing space. I think the other retail impact that I'm watching is what the Main Street impact will be. Essentially, what has been happening over the last several decades on Main Streets is that pretty much all the functional shopping on Main Streets has disappeared. There's still a hardware store on my piece of Main Street, but anything else that's what I would call useful has basically gone. There's next to no clothing shopping, and so women's apparel, the other big driver of retail streets, is not much there, apart from a very few specialty ones. Could COVID change that, though? I mean, I was speaking on my last podcast. I was interviewing the head of retail for Google, and he tells me that over the past 10 years, the term "near me" attached to searches has gone up 600-fold. Yeah. In other words, could this be the upside to the 2/3 of people are a third less of people are downtown, but that does mean the other third is out in the community? Could this be the beginning of a renaissance? Maybe. I suspect the nearest me is your keypad. and basically you're typing into Amazon. No, I think what's happened to those strips is that they have become what I would call entertainment retail. They are bars, restaurants, kind of specialty items, not places that deliver a kind of needed function in any way. You go to the big store for the big shopping center for that, or you get it online. To a huge extent, especially in a city like Toronto, those strips are fueled by successive waves of immigration. Some of the most thriving strips, you go up onto Lawrence Avenue East, which is the Iranian and Syrian area. It's fantastic. It's ugly as all get out. Man, oh man, oh man.
But it's vibrant, right? It's vibrant. It's interesting.
Booming.
Things are happening, right?
That's right.
Right on. Right.
So I think some of the more white bread strips are going to have a hell of a hard time. Toronto accepts 150,000-ish immigrants every year. What's job one? Frankly, job one is usually working in the food business. And so that I think we can look up to. But in places that have less immigration, I'm doing a fair bit in work in Ottawa right now, and there I would be very worried about the future of its retail strips.
Yeah. I hope you can come up with some ideas for Spark Street, because I'm an Ottawa native, and it's been the perennial
Well, that's
great idea
that's a classic
never happened.
Example.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's funny as you think. Just kind of my last thought is, I think as you describe areas and new Canadians, I think of Spadina, the Spadina area over the past 100 years in Toronto, that it was settled, and then different communities settled it, and now it's kind of a high tech place. I mean, it is this interesting transformation.
When I arrived in town 50 years ago, there was not a Chinese restaurant on Spadina.
Right.
It was essentially a Jewish and Eastern European street. The Chinese are now moving out. You can see that, and the tech wave,
moving to Markham, right? Moving north.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they're being followed by young, hip, tech-driven stuff. And that will go on forever. That's why Spadina is such a marvelous street. It's sort of the barometer of what's happening in the city.
Well, Joe, this has been such a great conversation, and thank you for bringing your insights to the podcast. I think we could probably talk about this for quite a long time, but in lieu of that, for the listeners, do pick up Joe's book, Perfect City, because it is really a nice, a great read and a nice review of cities, what makes them great, and potentially what is the future as much as we can see it today. So, Joe, thanks so much for being on the Voice of Retail podcast.
My pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks to Robin, Jason, and Joe for being my guests, plus Omnovos and Range for their support of this episode. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Rate, review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of LeBlanc Company Inc. You can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a safe week.